really do hope that this time in Ephesians has taught you the beauty, how rich Scripture is, that once you understand even a book of the Bible, it really does put weight into your faith. And one of the things that Paul has done in the previous chapters is he's opened up the physical to the spiritual, helped you see how cosmic this gospel is. And what he's doing now is connecting this cosmic gospel to everyday things. And so what does a gospel mean when you are married? What does a gospel mean when you are a parent? And today, what does the gospel mean as you work? A third of our lives we spend in the work, if not more. And with that, we want to be able to understand what the gospel has for us. And so let's read Ephesians 6, verse 5. Bondservants, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling, with a sincere heart, as you would Christ, not by the way of eye service as people pleasers, but as bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, rendering service with a good will as to the Lord, not to man, knowing that whatever good anyone does, this he will receive back from the Lord, whether he is a bondservant or is free. Masters, do the same to them, and stop your threatening, knowing that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and that there is no partiality with him. It's a heavy message because if you don't understand the context, you can actually misunderstand, actually think that Paul is condoning slavery. And we need to talk about that first so that we can get to the heart of what he's really saying. First lesson is that any work, almost any work, can be redeemed. This is the redemption of work, and that's what he is talking about. Because when you read this in verse 5, bondservants, those who are servants by bondage, by some sort of potential debt that they have to pay off. Speaking to slaves, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling. And if you're an honest reader of Scripture, you have to ask, what does that mean? Why would Paul even address that? Isn't that wrong? With a sincere heart as you would Christ. What does something that's written to a slave in the first century have anything to do with us in the 21st century, where I assume that all of us are free, right? So what does that text have to do with it? Is Paul condoning slavery? And we have to understand that so that we can get rid of what I believe is baggage to understand what he is really saying. Because it seems like he's potentially condoning oppression. It seems like he's condoning ownership of human beings. Is that what is going on? You have to understand that when Paul is writing, he did not understand what slavery would look like generations later, after the transatlantic slavery, how everything was often racially based, and how at this time it was not racially based. It was actually a very different understanding of what slavery is. One commentator, Lincoln, says that in this day and age, it was inconceivable to have an economy that did not have slaves. And it was so different that even the slaves, some of them, owned slaves. And so you have to realize this is a very, very different social structure that Paul is addressing. And many of the slaves were doctors, professors, administrators, civil servants. So again, it's a very different world that Paul is speaking into. It was not racially based, as I mentioned. It was never permanent. Often within 10 to 15 years, you would be able to work off any debt and buy yourself freedom. Slavery was never done through kidnapping, coercion in that way. Often it was after a battle. The losing nation would become slave servants and in time work their way to freedom. So again, very, very, very different. But you also see is that a passage like this sets the landscape, I believe, for freedom. It was actually passages like this that people really start to understand that the Bible has a very different view on humanity than the rest of the world. Where the rest of the world, where they would have a hierarchy, a caste system, and this idea of you would have to work your way up. And the Bible does not have that view. They had the view that all men, all women are created equal. So it's actually Christians, I'm sure if you know your history, you understand that it was Christians that fought for the lives of those who were oppressed. It's often even written in Scripture about justice in that way. Even Paul, in 1 Corinthians and Philemon, talks about, for slaves, if they can by their freedom, to do so. And so you even see the very root of his heart for freedom for all based in here. See, what Paul is doing is this. He was writing to the church in Ephesus. And what he wanted was for them to understand that there is immediate gospel blessing for those who are being persecuted in this way or who are oppressed in this way. That's what Paul is writing to. So imagine on a Sunday, you're a slave and you're sitting and you're listening to the word, to the letter that's written by Paul. Maybe you're a master and you're sitting in that room. And then imagine you're one of those two and you hear these words being addressed. Bondservant, obey your masters, right? Masters, in the same way, stop your threatening. What you start to realize is the gospel is supposed to enter into every sphere and redeem it. That's what we see here. There is no sacred and secular. Do you see that? There is no God cares about your sin and not sin, but he doesn't care about your Monday through Friday and what you do in the workplace. He doesn't just care about in the workplace that you're not cheating on your taxes. No, he actually cares about your work. That's what he's telling a slave here. He cares about the work, about the heart of his work. He gets to the core of it. So what we see here is not Paul condoning slavery. What we see here is the power of the gospel that can enter into any dark situation, any pit, and the gospel will go farther still and redeem it even within it. What that means is for some of you in your workplace that there is hope. Because chances are your work situation is better than the one here listed, right? Some of you may feel like slaves, but you're not, okay? Just to be very, very clear. The fact is that if the gospel has power for this slave to find hope and freedom there, how much more so for you? Ask your neighbor, do you enjoy work? Do you enjoy work? Just give them a simple yes or no. Because what Paul is saying is your work matters. Your Monday through Friday matters. And when I say work, I'm not simply talking about a paid occupation. I'm talking about any work that you do with your hands, with your mind, and you execute that throughout the week. This is what you wake up for. If you don't wake up for this, things fall through. So obviously for many of us, it's an occupation. It's teaching. It's a corporate job. It's something along those lines. For others of us, it's parenting. Your work matters. All of this matters. And what he is saying here is no matter how dark the situation is, the gospel has a message saying you need the gospel to be able to redeem any work situation. God can redeem your work situation. So tell your neighbor, God can redeem your work situation. Some of you don't believe it, but my hope is that you do. Throughout this sermon, you start to understand that truth. Abraham Kuyper says this, a very well-known quote, "There is not a square inch in the whole dominion of our human existence over which Christ Christ, who is sovereign over all, does not cry, mine." Meaning that not only every square inch, but I would say every square act, everything that you do matters. For the slave, when they heard this word of Paul being addressed to them, I think for some of them, they were kind of surprised. Me? Wait, did I hear that correctly? Paul, you're addressing me? You're saying that my work matters? You're saying that not just my work matters, but the heart in which I do it, that matters? it would have been surprising for the slave to understand, wow, my work, it's not in vain, it has purpose. And so no matter how meaningless or menial you feel like your job is, to understand that God can and will redeem it when you do it in Christ. But also, what it does is it redeems any work situation, really. If God can redeem a slave-master situation, I mean, I don't know your work situation, but it can't be that bad, right? It can't be that bad. So you start to wonder, is it worth it? Is it really worth it? Does my work really matter? And this is a relevant question for a lot of us, because you want to cut corners. You see some people where they compromise financially. They fib a little bit. They lie a little bit in the documentation. Right? You cut corners financially to pay maybe less taxes. The temptation will be to sacrifice your maybe moral integrity for the advancement of your career. I know an architect here in Korea, and he spends most of his time abroad. And I asked him, why is it? I thought he was like really skilled and successful, and he is, but I thought he was like in demand. I thought he was so like well respected that he would travel literally all around the world for his architect business. And I talked with him, and I learned that the reason he does not do business here in Korea is because he could not find a client that would not be willing to bribe. Because they basically had so much is done under the table. And him being Christian and him having integrity, he didn't know how he could have business contracts here, clients here, and not be shady, and not compromise in those ways. And so literally, he left the country to set up shop in Europe, in the US, in different places. And basically, every week he's gone. Monday through Friday, he leaves, does these meetings, and comes back to be with his family. That's how much dedication he has to the importance to knowing that how he works matters. That's what he's saying. Your work matters. Tell your neighbor your work matters. God, the way he designed it so that you would know that your Monday through Friday has meaning. Your Sunday through Saturday is not your Sunday is not the only important day. That every day is important. There's redeeming value, but also with that, the way that God designed it is that you're supposed to be satisfied with your work. So I asked you, right? Are you happy? Right? Are you happy with your work? Chances are, for many of us, that's a struggle. But that's not how God designed it. If you actually read carefully here, Paul is doing something significant. He's helping us understand the secret, I believe, the key to finding satisfaction in the workplace. Because he addresses the heart and he addresses God. He helps us understand the importance of how we live, because often in our heart, we're not doing it purely, our work, but also we're not doing it unto the Lord. There's two different ways in which we often fail with our relationship with work. One is you live to work, and the other is you work to live. The first is this: you work to live, meaning all that you do, all the work on Monday through Friday, all those hours, all those grading of paper or whatever it is, all of that, for you in your mind, you are working to live. Meaning you go into your day job, you cash in and you cash out. And that cash that you receive is why you work. And you think this is what life is. Life is cursed. Work is cursed. And this is this is an evil necessity of life. Right? This is something that many of us approach work with. We finish our school, we finish our teaching, and we can't wait for the summer because it's the summer where we really live. But August to June or whatever, it's all a necessary evil. A friend of mine, he was pretty high up with Facebook in the corporate structure. Recently, he switched jobs to a startup electric car company. Met up with him recently. I'm like, that's pretty cool. Like, you get to work, for the future, figuring out sustainable energy and figuring out how cars can, be sustainable. It's, pretty awesome. He's like, I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like pretty high up there. He's got a lot of stock with the company. And he just starts sharing about all the headache, all the ways in which he's miserable working there. So I said, isn't there anything? Isn't there even a bit? Isn't there just a little bit of joy that you find in your workplace? He's like, no, not at all. I was like, what? So much so that his goal now is to retire at the age of 45. That's his goal. He is so done, so checked out with work, that his goal is by the age of 45, he'll have enough stock options within his company that he could basically cash out and live off that for the rest of his life. I'm thinking, that's not right. Because a third of your life, some of you, maybe half of your life will be in the workplace. Something about 90,000 hours you spend at work. If you see work as a place where you simply make money to live, you will find that place miserable. This is prevalent in all our thinking. Even artists who enter into music for the love of music, for the love of creating good music, find themselves being tempted in terms of thinking to work to live. The Beatles, Paul McCartney, says this. Somebody said to me, but the Beatles were anti-materialistic. That's a huge myth. John and I literally used to sit down and say, now let's write a swimming pool. Right? To write a song, make some money, let's put it in a swimming pool. Now let's write some money, let's buy an airplane. Now let's write a song and do this. And even for an artist who enters into a field really out of love, this is a temptation. You work so that you can live. And in the gospel, the Bible would speak something differently from that. Yes, there is frustration in work. Genesis 3, it's a part of the curse of sin. As we work, there is thorns, thistles. Now it's a painful process at times. But God's original design of Genesis 1 and 2, of God making Adam and Eve gardeners. He didn't make Adam and Eve a pastor. Do you know that? He didn't make Adam and Eve a missionary. He made Adam and Eve a gardener. And God thought that would be a God-glorifying act, God-glorifying work. And so when you start to understand that this is from the very beginning, God has very good intentions for work, but yes, it is cursed, there is struggle, your goal is to find the goodness in work. So you don't work to live. But also, you don't live to work. That's the other extreme. That you live to work. That is the only thing that wakes you up at night. It's the only meaning that you have in life. And again, if you fall into this trap, it's just a matter of time. A bad employee, that promotion that you don't get, that job that you don't get, the salary that you don't get. It's just a matter of time until you start to realize life is way too big than just work. Genesis 11 talks about this idea. It's actually as Genesis 3 through sin, and you see that the spiral, the downward spiral of sin from Genesis 3 to Genesis 11, it's right before Genesis 12 when God speaks to Abraham. Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel, is put there for us to understand how perverted, how corrupt sin makes our world. And this is what it says. In verse 3, and they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its tops in the heaven. And let us make a name for ourselves. It seems so small, right? What's the big deal? What's the big deal that people do things for themselves? What's the big deal that people want to make a name for themselves? What's the big deal that corporations want to simply make profit and become a major company? What's the big deal with that? Because it's a world that we live in where every person lives for themselves. that you start to realize the corruption that we live in, the society we live in, is simply a byproduct that every person is living for themselves. Picture this. You bring your car into a car mechanic. He takes a look at your car, and he tells you it'll be about $1,000 to fix your car. What do you immediately think through? Is this guy trying to rip me off? Isn't it what we all think through? What's the reason behind it? Why is it so expensive? But think about that. That's what we do for everything. Can I trust this product? Can I believe in what he or she is saying? You go to a car dealer, and they say, this is the lowest we can do. But something in our hearts, we don't believe them, because maybe at some point we were scammed, we were ripped off. And so we are always asking people, are they doing this with sincerity? Or are they out to make more money? Are they out to make a name for themselves? You see, there's two wrong ways that we deal with work, and both ways have corrupted society. One, you work to live, the other, you live to work. So what's the third option? There has to be a third option, right? Paul is saying here, you work to work. Get that? You work to work. You don't live to work, you don't work to live, you work to work. Work is work. You do that work out of the purity of that. It's like, what? A couple of weeks ago, I was at a university speaking to university students. And I was challenging them why they study. Do you study for the A? Do you study for the grade? Do you study for the job? Do you study for the money? Or do you study to learn? They're like, what? Right? I'm like, do you study to learn? It's like, whoa. I learn math to learn math. I read to understand what this is saying, right? For them, it's like, but that's what it's saying. Our world is so corrupt, you can't go to a car dealer and trust that he's giving you the best offer. We're always skeptical because we live in a world where people aren't doing things purely. And what Paul is saying is the way to do work as a Christian is you work to work. Verse 5, 6, 7 talks about the heart. 3 times he talks about the heart. 3 times he talks about God. Verse 5, sincere heart, right? Obey with a sincere heart. Verse 6, doing the will of God from the heart. And you have to ask, why does it matter, God? Why does it matter that the slave is obeying from the heart, working from the heart? Isn't it important that he's just obedient? Paul's saying, no, it is not. He obeys with a sincere heart. He does the will of God with a sincere heart. Verse 7, rendering service with goodwill, pure intentions is what he's talking about. What he is saying is your relationship with work, it doesn't matter that you just work. You should work. You should have a purpose. You should find fulfillment in the things that you do Monday through Friday. He's saying, yes, it's important that you work, but what he's really saying is this. It's important that you work, but it's important that you have a proper relationship with work. It's important that you have a pure purpose with your work. Because what he is saying is the way that you treat your work, the way that you treat it is what you will receive in return. If you simply serve people for the sake of serving people, you will find true meaning in the workplace. So he's talking about the heart, and then he's talking about God. Paul addresses working for the Lord 3 times in verse 5, 6, 7. As you would Christ, as bondservants of Christ. Verse 7, as to the Lord. What he is saying, this is a God issue. It's a spiritual issue. It seems so minute, right? Work, when you go to work on Monday, just do that work with a pure heart. Meaning what you're assigned to do, just do that the best as you can. Right? It's not an exciting sermon. Right? It's not like you walk away like, oh yeah, I'm going to go in and work on Monday. It's going to be no, it's going to be the same thing. But Paul is saying here, but you do that purely. And imagine a world, Christians, they all go into the workplace with that mindset. Tim Keller on this topic says this. According to the Bible, we don't merely need the money from work to survive. We need the work itself to survive and live fully human lives, which is another reason why after retirement so many people die so quickly. Because we are created for work. It doesn't give the only meaning to life, but it is essential part of meaning in life. So imagine the mechanic, right? You could go to the mechanic and you trust that mechanic. He says it's $1,000 for these other reasons. Imagine every time you go to the mechanic, he's honest. Every time you go to a car dealer, he's honest. Imagine. Every time you go into any place, you never have to worry, are they genuinely doing a good job? Can I trust their intentions? Imagine hiring a nanny, right, for your kid. Imagine that kid, not your kid, but the kid that will be doing the nannying. Maybe he or she is recently graduated from college. And he goes into your workplace and he says, yeah, I want to watch your kid. Oh, for what reason? To make money. Oh, but do you have any experience? No. Will you do a good job? I don't know. Can I work here? What would you say? By no means. No way can you do that job because my child's too precious. Because what we all want is a nanny that will care for the child well. And imagine every job and every occupation where everyone is trustworthy. That's what he is saying, to work with an honest and sincere heart. This is how you find satisfaction in your workplace, to know that as you work, there's meaning there, and God can even redeem it for something greater. That's why he even says that as you work, he rewards you. He watches over you. There's satisfaction in that place. When you do it to make a name for yourself, when you do it for the 6 figures, when you do it solely to climb up the corporate ladder, it'll be in all those ways. One day you will really feel so empty about work. And when things don't fall through, when you don't get the job, it'll seem so futile and you want to give it all up. That's when you realize when you live to work, it doesn't amount to anything. The way that you find satisfaction in your work is if you teach, what do you try to do? You be the best teacher you can be. It's like, okay. Imagine a surgeon. All right, one pastor says it this way. Imagine you're going into surgery. What do you hope for from the surgeon? Do you hope that the surgeon is Christian? Right? Oh, I hope my surgeon's a Christian. I hope he prayed and did his devotionals that morning. I hope that he is sharing the gospel to his coworkers. Is that what you want? Those are nice. No, what do you want from your surgeon? You want to know that your surgeon knows how to do surgery. He's excellent with his hands. He's a master in science and the body, and he or she knows how to complete that surgery well. That's what you want. That's what a Christian surgeon should be. Yes, to pray and all those things are good, but the goal is to be excellent. That's what the call is here for the slave, to be excellent, to serve your master in a way that actually honors the master. If you own a business, think about what does it mean where money is not the bottom line. Yes, money and profit is important. You have to be strategic in how you do it. But asking yourself, what does it look like for this company to be a service to somebody? In your workplace, the question is, what does it look like for me to do this excellently? They trust me through it. That's when you find satisfaction in the workplace, when you don't manipulate it for your own advances. So lastly, relationships. Relationships at work. He talks about the content of your work, but not only the content, but the interpersonal relationships. Right? Because as Paul addresses the servant, the master will also be surprised. He would actually be shocked. Because in this verse it says, masters, do the same. Do the same to them. Everything that was asked of the servant, of the slave, is now asked of the master. This would have been humbling for the master, because now they're put into the same camp. I believe it's texts like this that helped people realize the injustice of slavery. Because the way that God created the world, there is no hierarchy. There is no one better than the other, which is why it ends in this verse, there is no partiality. God will judge the master and the slave equally. F.F. Bruce says this about slavery in this text. What Paul's letters do is to bring up into an atmosphere in which the institution of slavery could only wilt and die. It's passages like this that's so countercultural that for the master, they were probably offended and shocked to hear, you want me to treat my slave in a way that they treat me in the same reciprocal way? And it's a loud yes. You see the implications of this? The implications of this are astounding. Because in any culture with any kind of hierarchy or caste system, it's speaking to that level, to that culture of oppression. The way that I see it is my father-in-law. He is one of the most humble people I know. And the way that I see him treat everybody with honor always is humbling to me. So whenever he comes over to Korea and he stays with us for a little bit and we're potentially walking out into the street, if there's a cleaning lady there, he'll always stop and see how she's doing and just have a small chat with her. He'll do that with, what's the person that governs your apartment? The ajashi? That person, that guard, that security guard, he'll always small talk with him. Hey, how are you doing? Oh, it's a great day, isn't it? And always trying to uplift their spirits. I seen him after a cab ride. No, one time I was walking with him, and he asked where the post office was. And I asked him, I told him, in this direction. And then as he starts walking, I asked him, oh, what are you going to send? He says, oh, I wrote a letter to the bus company because this one bus driver was so kind and he was so polite to the elderly. I wanted to write a letter to the bus system to let them know this man and the good work that he's doing. And when he does that, it always humbles me because he always sees the little people in one sense. And God always sees the little people as well. That's what he's saying in this text. That's why the first words is, masters, do the same to them, and then to not threaten them. The relationships that you have at work, if you're in a position of authority, my question is, do they fear you? If they fear you and only fear you, and that fear is not respect, there's something that you have to change about how you lead. That's what it's addressing. That there is no hierarchy in God's kingdom, and that's what he's breaking down. So what does that mean then? Right? What does that mean? If you are in a position of leadership, what does that mean? How do you lead in a way where you don't use fear to get the job done? It's the same idea, with a pure heart. Imagine a boss. Get this. Imagine your boss has a pure and humble heart. Wow, that's amazing, right? Imagine your boss truly has not his best intentions in place, but the company's best intentions in place. And he's got the people below him and their best intentions in place. And he is collaborative and he's humble and he receives feedback because he's doing everything with a pure heart. Do you see this small line of everything being done with a pure heart? You start to realize how important it is. One of the reasons we have such a corrupt world is because everyone does it for themselves. And the question then is there any master like this? Is there any boss like this who would truly humble themselves and see them as equal to someone lower than them, so much so that even a slave? Or the other question is how can we actually work in this way? How can we actually work in a way where we're not trying to always outdo everybody? Because if you've tried to do this, you've held integrity in your workplace, you haven't cut corners, you don't bash other people. What you find out is this. You do this for a few weeks, a couple of months. You start to realize though you want to do things with a good intention, others will want to undercut you. Others will try to beat you to the punch. Others will try to get recognized. You start to realize this way of life as a believer in the workplace, it doesn't seem like I can really succeed, which is why Paul again talks about how as you work, he watches it and will reward you. But you also realize this. As much as you want to not work to live or live to work, you realize this. Sometimes you can't help it. Sometimes you are so addicted, so hungry for the name, so hungry for the position, so hungry for that promotion, so hungry for that salary increase. And what you realize is you and I, we need security. We need to be set free, right? This past week, watched Aladdin again. And good movie. If you haven't watched it, total spoiler today. And if you haven't watched it, it's totally on you because it's been out for many, many years. It's a story of this young man, not very wealthy, in love with a princess, right? And somehow he finds this lamp with a genie. And so you know how the story goes. He's got 3 wishes. First, he uses the wish to make himself a prince so that he can talk with this princess. The second wish he uses to save his own life when he was in dire situation. But in the very beginning, he told the genie, but with my 3rd wish, I will set you free. Remember that? He says, I will set you free, as the genie complains about being in bondage and slavery for years. And then, by the end of the movie, it's a situation where Aladdin is put in place, where he needs to use his last wish to win over the princess, to become a prince again, to be able to be on equal footing with her and to marry her. And the genie is excited. The genie wants him to get married. He says, yeah, I'll make you the best prince. And he goes, no, this is what I'll do. And then as he's speaking, you know the story, Aladdin says, Genie, with my 3rd wish, I set you free. And you see in the genie's eyes, shock. Wait, what? With your last wish, you don't wish to become the prince, but instead you're going to use it as an act of love to free me. And you see the chains being broken off the genie. And now genie, for the first time, has a choice. He's not enslaved anymore. For the first time, he's got a choice to be himself, to live, to be free. And that's the gospel. That's the gospel, right? That you are free. Free to love, free to serve, free to have a proper relationship with your workplace, where you can genuinely honor your boss. It may be a toxic environment, but the gospel says he watches over you. He will care for you. It doesn't mean you'll get the salary that you want per se or the promotion that you want, but it does say he sees it and he will watch over you. It says that you don't have to make a name for yourself because God has made a name for you. He has died for you in that place. When you ask yourself, what kind of master would ever do that? Jesus did. Jesus died so that your Monday through Friday would have eternal significance. You see, what the world does not need is another Christian that's rich. What the world needs are Christians that interact with their workplace with a pure heart, honorable. They don't scheme, they're trustworthy. That's what the world needs. Imagine every Christian all around the world that looks like that. Would the gospel not go forward? Would he not be light? And that's a challenge for the gospel to go forward, for Christ to be exalted, for us to love one more person through the purity of our work in the workplace. Let's pray.